Few figures in history have left a legacy as profound as Napoleon Bonaparte, a man whose ambition and genius shaped Europe and the world in ways that still resonate today. From his humble beginnings on the island of Corsica to his meteoric rise as Emperor of France, Napoleon's life was marked by triumphs and tragedies, battles and betrayals, reforms and revolutions. This is the story of a man who dreamed of greatness, achieved it, and paid the ultimate price. Chapter 1: Napoleon's early life and education. Imagine a Mediterranean island, rugged and windswept, nestled in the blue expanse of the sea. This is Corsica, an island with a history of rebellion and a people fiercely proud of their identity. It is here, on August 15, 1769, that a child is born who would one day reshape the world. That child is Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was the second of 8 children born to Carlo Bonaparte and Letizia Ramolino. The Bonapartes were part of Corsica's minor nobility, a status that granted them some prestige, but little wealth. Corsica itself had only recently been ceded to France by the Republic of Genoa, and tensions between the native Corsicans and their new French rulers ran high. Growing up in this politically charged atmosphere, young Napoleon was instilled with a sense of pride in his Corsican heritage and a disdain for the French elite, a sentiment that would later evolve into his relentless ambition to prove himself. A boy of sharp mind and fierce temper from a young age, Napoleon exhibited traits that set him apart. He was intensely curious, devouring books on history, philosophy, and military tactics. Yet he was also quick-tempered, fiercely competitive, and unyielding in his opinions. His siblings often bore the brunt of his fiery temperament, but they also admired his intellect and determination. Napoleon's mother, Letizia, played a crucial role in shaping his character. Known for her discipline and resilience, Letizia managed the household with an iron will. She instilled in Napoleon a sense of duty and discipline that would serve him well in his military career. His father, Carlo, was a more indulgent figure, a lawyer and politician who dreamed of elevating the family's status. Carlo's connections eventually secured Napoleon a scholarship to study in mainland France, a turning point in the young boy's life. The journey to mainland France in 1779, at the tender age of 9, Napoleon left Corsica for the first time to attend the Royal Military School in Brienne-le-Château, northeast France. Imagine a young boy, speaking French with a heavy Corsican accent, arriving in a land that viewed his people as outsiders. At Brienne, Napoleon faced ridicule from his peers for his accent, his modest background, and his unwavering pride in his Corsican roots. But Napoleon was not one to be broken by adversity. He turned his isolation into a source of strength, immersing himself in his studies. He excelled in mathematics, geography, and history, subjects that would later prove invaluable on the battlefield. His notebooks were filled with sketches of fortifications and battle plans, and his teachers noted his extraordinary ability to grasp complex strategies. A passion for strategy, one of Napoleon's favorite pastimes, was studying the campaigns of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Frederick the Great. He would often debate with his classmates about military tactics, using small objects like chess pieces or stones to simulate battles. His passion for strategy earned him the nickname, the Little Corporal, a title that would later take on legendary significance. Yet, life at Brienne was far from easy. The cold winters, rigid discipline, and social hierarchy of the school were challenges Napoleon had to endure. His peers saw him as aloof and ambitious, traits that made him both admired and resented. Despite this, he began to develop the leadership qualities that would define his future: decisiveness, resilience, and an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty. The transition to École Militaire in 1784. At the age of 15, Napoleon was admitted to the prestigious École Militaire in Paris, an institution reserved for France's most promising military students. His time at École Militaire marked a significant step in his journey. Unlike Brienne, where he was an outsider, École Militaire provided Napoleon with the opportunity to study under some of the greatest military minds of the time. Napoleon specialized in artillery, a field that required precision, innovation, and a deep understanding of mathematics and physics. He graduated in just 1 year, a remarkable feat considering the program usually took 2 years to complete. His instructors were impressed by his work ethic and intellect, though they noted his impatience and tendency to question authority, traits that would later become both his greatest strengths and his greatest weaknesses. The burden of responsibility tragedy struck shortly after Napoleon's graduation. In 1785, his father, Carlo, succumbed to stomach cancer, leaving the family in financial difficulty. As the second eldest son, Napoleon felt the weight of responsibility to support his mother and siblings. This personal loss deepened his resolve to succeed, driving him to prove himself not only to the world, but also to his family. Napoleon's first posting as a second lieutenant in the artillery took him to Valence, a garrison town in southeastern France. Here, he continued his education informally, reading voraciously on topics ranging from politics to economics. He also began writing, producing essays and pamphlets that reflected his thoughts on leadership, governance, and the art of war. Seeds of ambition. During his time in Valence, Napoleon's ambition began to crystallize. He was acutely aware of the limitations imposed by his Corsican heritage and modest background, but he also recognized the opportunities presented by the turbulent political climate of France. The French Revolution was on the horizon, and with it came the promise of a society based on merit rather than birthright, a society where a young Corsican artillery officer could rise to power. As Napoleon climbed the military ranks, he was fueled by a combination of intellectual curiosity, personal loss, and a burning desire to leave his mark on history. Little did anyone know that this young officer, often underestimated and dismissed, would soon become the architect of a new European order. What challenges would he face as he navigated the chaos of revolutionary France? How would he seize opportunities to rise above his station? And what sacrifices would he make in his relentless pursuit of greatness? Stay tuned for Chapter 2, The Rise to Power, a Revolutionary Opportunity, where we delve into the dramatic events that catapulted Napoleon from obscurity to the forefront of French politics and military command. Chapter 2. The Rise to Power, a Revolutionary Opportunity. The stage was set. By the late 1780s, France was a powder keg waiting to explode. Centuries of royal extravagance and social inequality had pushed the country to the brink. As whispers of rebellion turned into roars, Napoleon Bonaparte found himself at the precipice of history. What no one could have predicted was how this young, ambitious artillery officer from Corsica would capitalize on the chaos of the French Revolution to carve out his destiny. But Napoleon's rise to power was far from straightforward. It was a journey fraught with betrayals, shifting alliances, and an uncanny ability to navigate through the fog of political unrest. How did this outsider, an officer with no influential patrons, rise above the storm? This is where the story truly begins. The revolution erupts in 1789. The French Revolution erupted with the storming of the Bastille. The monarchy was crumbling, and the Ancien regime was under siege. For Napoleon, the revolution was more than a political upheaval, it was an opportunity. The revolution promised to dismantle the rigid social hierarchy that had kept men like him on the fringes of power. Suddenly, a world where talent and ambition mattered more than birthright seemed possible. However, Napoleon's early years in the revolution were not marked by immediate success. He returned to Corsica, his homeland, hoping to play a role in shaping its future. But Corsica was a land divided, caught between loyalty to France and the dreams of independence led by Pasquale Paoli, a Corsican nationalist hero. Napoleon initially allied himself with Paoli, but their relationship quickly soured. Paoli viewed Napoleon as too ambitious and too willing to embrace French ideals. In 1793, tensions boiled over, and the Bonaparte family was forced to flee Corsica, leaving behind their property and dreams of a Corsican utopia. It was a bitter betrayal, but one that hardened Napoleon's resolve. Corsica was now a memory. France would be his future. The siege of Toulon, is born. The turning point came later that same year. France was at war with much of Europe, and the revolution's enemies were circling like vultures. The southern city of Toulon had fallen to royalist forces and their British allies. Retaking the city was critical, but the French army was disorganized and demoralized. It was here, in the chaos of the siege, that Napoleon first showcased his brilliance. Assigned to the artillery, Napoleon devised a bold strategy to cut off the British fleet by capturing key fortifications. His plan was audacious, relying on precision and coordination that seemed impossible for the poorly trained revolutionary troops. But Napoleon's leadership inspired confidence. Under his command, the French forces executed a series of daring maneuvers that culminated in the recapture of Toulon. The victory was decisive, and Napoleon's role did not go unnoticed. At just 24 years old, he was promoted to brigadier general, a meteoric rise for someone of his background. The siege of Toulon was more than a military triumph. It was Napoleon's first step into the spotlight. Yet, even as he celebrated his success, new challenges loomed on the horizon. Would this young general be able to navigate the treacherous waters of revolutionary politics? The turmoil of the revolution, the years that followed, were a whirlwind of political intrigue and shifting loyalties. The French Revolution had entered its most radical phase, with the Reign of Terror claiming thousands of lives, including King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. The guillotine became a symbol of justice, and no one was safe, not even Napoleon. In 1794, Napoleon found himself arrested during the Thermidorian reaction, a counter-revolutionary movement that sought to dismantle the radical Jacobin regime. Accused of being a Jacobin sympathizer, Napoleon's career seemed on the verge of collapse. But his arrest was short-lived, and his release only strengthened his determination to rise above the political chaos. Napoleon's ability to adapt to the ever-changing landscape of revolutionary France was remarkable. He formed alliances when necessary, distanced himself from falling regimes, and always kept his eyes on the ultimate prize, power. A brilliant strategist and opportunist, Napoleon's next major opportunity came in 1795, during the Royalist insurrection in Paris. The French government, known as the Directory, was under siege from Royalist forces seeking to restore the monarchy. Napoleon, still a relatively obscure figure, was tasked with defending the government. What followed was a masterclass in military strategy and psychological warfare. Napoleon ordered his troops to use cannons loaded with grapeshot to scatter the insurgents, a move that was both ruthless and effective. The rebellion was crushed, and the Directory was saved. This victory earned Napoleon the nickname General Vendémiaire and solidified his reputation as a man who could be trusted in moments of crisis. But Napoleon was not content to be a mere savior of the Directory. He had bigger ambitions, and the next chapter of his life would see him take his first steps onto the world stage. By 1796, Napoleon was given command of the French army of Italy, a position that would catapult him into the annals of history. The campaign in Italy was unlike anything the world had seen before. With limited resources and a demoralized army, Napoleon would achieve the impossible, defeating Austria and its allies in a series of breathtaking battles. But before we dive into the Italian campaign, let's pause and reflect on the man behind the legend. How did Napoleon transform from a young officer with no connections into a general commanding the respect of an entire nation? What sacrifices did he make, and what compromises did he accept to secure his rise? Stay tuned for Chapter 3, The Italian Campaign, The Making of a Legend, where we'll explore how Napoleon's genius on the battlefield began to reshape Europe, and how his insatiable ambitions started to take root. Chapter 3, The Italian Campaign, The Making of a Legend. Napoleon Bonaparte, now 26 years old, stood on the threshold of greatness. The French revolutionary government had placed him in command of the Army of Italy, a force riddled with poor morale, meager supplies, and political infighting. To many, it seemed like a death sentence, a daunting assignment that no ordinary general could hope to salvage. But Napoleon was no ordinary general. As he crossed the Alps and entered the war-torn plains of northern Italy, Napoleon's true genius began to shine. He would not only transform a ragged army into an unstoppable force, but also cement his name as one of the greatest military minds in history. The Italian campaign marked the beginning of Napoleon's meteoric rise, a campaign filled with breathtaking victories, daring strategies, and a ruthless ambition that foreshadowed his future as a ruler. A demoralized army meets its savior. When Napoleon first arrived in Nice to take command of the Army of Italy, he was met with skepticism and disdain. The soldiers, many of whom were starving and unpaid, saw a diminutive man with an unassuming presence. But Napoleon's first address to his troops shattered any doubts about his leadership. "Soldiers," he proclaimed, "you are starving and naked. The government owes you much, but can give you nothing. I am here to lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces and great cities will be in your power, and there you will find honor, glory, and wealth." It was a bold promise, but Napoleon backed it with action. He personally inspected the troops, reorganized supply lines, and ensured that discipline was enforced. Most importantly, he instilled a sense of purpose. To Napoleon, victory was not merely a goal. It was a necessity. The Battle of Montenotte, a masterclass in strategy. Napoleon's first test came at the Battle of Montenotte in April 1796. Facing the combined forces of Austria and Piedmont Sardinia, he was outnumbered and outgunned. But where others saw obstacles, Napoleon saw opportunities. Using the rugged terrain to his advantage, Napoleon divided his forces, a risky maneuver that allowed him to attack the Austrians and Piedmontese separately. In a lightning-fast assault, he overwhelmed the Austrian forces, forcing them to retreat. The victory at Montenotte was not just a tactical success, it was a psychological triumph. Napoleon had proven that he could outthink and outmaneuver far superior forces. The campaign continued with a string of victories at Dego, Mondovi, and Lodi, each battle showcasing Napoleon's ability to adapt, innovate, and inspire. By the time he entered Milan, he was hailed as a hero, not just by his troops, but by the Italian population, who saw him as a liberator from Austrian rule. The bridge at Lodi, a moment of immortality perhaps. No moment in the Italian campaign encapsulates Napoleon's audacity and charisma more than the Battle of Lodi. Facing a well-defended Austrian position on the opposite side of the Adda River, Napoleon ordered a frontal assault across the narrow bridge. The charge was suicidal, but Napoleon led from the front, rallying his troops with his presence and fearlessness. The sight of their general braving musket fire and cannonballs inspired the soldiers to push forward, eventually routing the Austrians. After the battle, Napoleon famously remarked, "From that moment, I foresaw that I might become a decisive actor on our political stage." The bridge at Lodi became a symbol of his indomitable will and the beginning of his transformation into a legend. Diplomacy and deception. The Treaty of Campo Formio. Napoleon's victories in Italy were not confined to the battlefield. He also demonstrated a keen understanding of diplomacy. In 1797, after a series of crushing defeats, Austria sued for peace. The resulting Treaty of Campo Formio was a masterpiece of negotiation. Napoleon secured vast territorial gains for France, including the Austrian Netherlands and parts of northern Italy, while reorganizing the region into client states loyal to the French Republic. The treaty not only expanded France's influence, but also showcased Napoleon's vision of reshaping Europe. But the treaty was more than a diplomatic victory. It was a testament to Napoleon's ability to blend military prowess with political acumen. He had not only defeated one of Europe's most powerful empires, but also laid the groundwork for his own future ambitions. The myth of invincibility. By the end of the Italian campaign, Napoleon was no longer just a general, he was a living legend. His soldiers referred to him as the Little Corporal, a term of endearment that reflected his willingness to share their hardships. The French public, hungry for heroes in the wake of the revolution, celebrated him as a savior, yet, behind the adulation lay the seeds of future conflict. Napoleon's success had made him indispensable to the Directory, but it had also made him a threat. His growing popularity and independent streak raised fears among France's political elite. Would this rising star remain loyal to the Republic? Or did he have greater ambitions? As the Italian campaign drew to a close, Napoleon's restless ambition began to seek new challenges. In 1798, he proposed an audacious plan to invade Egypt, a move that would disrupt British trade routes to India and further enhance his prestige. But the Egyptian campaign was not just about military conquest, it was about legacy. Napoleon envisioned himself as a modern Alexander the Great, bringing enlightenment and progress to the lands he conquered. What awaited him in Egypt was a journey filled with triumphs, failures, and discoveries that would forever shape his destiny. Stay tuned for Chapter 4, The Egyptian Campaign: Ambition Beyond Borders, where we'll explore how Napoleon's quest for glory in the deserts of Egypt revealed both his brilliance and his hubris. Chapter 4. The Egyptian Campaign: Ambition Beyond Borders. The vision of a new conqueror. It was 1798, and Napoleon Bonaparte, fresh from his stunning victories in Italy, was not content to bask in his glory. While others saw a victorious general, Napoleon saw himself as a figure destined for something far greater. France was at war with Britain, and rather than confront the powerful British Navy head-on, Napoleon proposed an audacious plan, an expedition to Egypt. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a mission to establish a new French empire in the East, cut off Britain's access to its lifeline in India, and secure his place in history as a modern Alexander the Great. Napoleon presented the idea to the Directory, framing it as both a strategic and a cultural endeavor. Egypt, with its ancient civilization and key geographic position, was a prize worth risking everything for. The Directory, eager to send Napoleon far from Paris to curtail his growing influence, approved the plan. But little did they know, this expedition would be a double-edged sword, one that would showcase Napoleon's brilliance while exposing his vulnerabilities. The departure and a journey into the unknown. On May 19, 1798, Napoleon's armada of more than 300 ships set sail from Toulon, carrying 35,000 troops, scientists, engineers, and scholars. This was no ordinary army. Alongside soldiers, Napoleon brought the brightest minds of France to study Egypt's culture, history, and natural resources, giving the expedition an air of enlightenment. The voyage itself was perilous. As they crossed the Mediterranean, the fleet evaded the British Navy under Admiral Horatio Nelson, who was hunting them relentlessly. The suspense built as Napoleon's fleet neared Egypt. With every passing day, the soldiers and scholars wondered what awaited them in this mysterious land of deserts and ancient ruins. For Napoleon, the journey was personal. This was his chance to carve his name into the annals of history, not just as a military genius, but as a cultural and intellectual pioneer. The capture of Alexandria and the road to Cairo on July 1, 1798, the French forces landed near Alexandria, and within hours, the city fell. It was a swift and decisive victory, but the real challenge lay ahead. To secure Egypt, Napoleon had to march his army across the harsh desert to Cairo, where the Mamluks, the ruling military elite, awaited. The journey to Cairo was grueling. The soldiers endured blistering heat, scarce water supplies, and the ever-present threat of ambush. But Napoleon's ability to inspire his men kept them moving forward. "Soldiers," he declared, "40 centuries look down upon you." These words, spoken before the looming pyramids of Giza, electrified his troops and underscored the historical significance of their mission. The Battle of the Pyramids, a clash of eras. The climax of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign came on July 21, 1798, at the Battle of the Pyramids. Facing a formidable Mamluk force of 25,000 cavalry, Napoleon devised a strategy that would become legendary: the divisional square formation. This tactic, which positioned infantry in hollow squares with cannons at the corners, proved impenetrable to the Mamluks' charges. As the Mamluks charged with ferocious speed, the disciplined French squares held their ground, unleashing devastating volleys of musket fire. The battle was a decisive victory for Napoleon, cementing his reputation as a master tactician. The Mamluks were crushed, and Cairo fell into French hands shortly after. But the victory came at a cost. Napoleon's presence in Egypt had drawn the full attention of Britain. Disaster at sea. The Battle of the Nile. While Napoleon celebrated his victories on land, disaster struck at sea. On August 1, 1798, Admiral Nelson's fleet finally caught up with the French at Abuka Bay, leading to the catastrophic Battle of the Nile. The British Navy annihilated Napoleon's fleet, stranding him and his army in Egypt. The loss was a severe blow to Napoleon's plans. Without control of the Mediterranean, his dream of an Eastern Empire was effectively over. But Napoleon, ever the master of propaganda, minimized the defeat, focusing instead on his accomplishments on land. To his troops and the people of France, he portrayed the campaign as a triumph. Even as the reality grew increasingly dire, the Rosetta Stone, and the legacy of discovery. Despite the military setbacks, Napoleon's Egyptian expedition had a profound cultural and scientific impact. The scholars he brought with him made groundbreaking discoveries, including the Rosetta Stone, which would later unlock the secrets of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Napoleon's fascination with Egypt's history and culture inspired a wave of Egyptomania in Europe, leaving a lasting legacy that extended far beyond the battlefield. Napoleon established the Institut d'Egypte in Cairo, bringing together French and local scholars to study the region's history, geography, and resources. This blend of military conquest and intellectual curiosity was unique to Napoleon's character, showcasing his vision of combining power with progress. The campaign turns desperate as months turned into years. The Egyptian campaign descended into hardship. The French faced constant resistance from local populations, disease ravaged the troops, and morale plummeted. Napoleon's dream of creating a new empire in the East faded, replaced by the harsh reality of survival. In 1799, Napoleon launched an ill-fated invasion of Syria, hoping to secure his position in the region. The campaign was a disaster. His forces were decimated by disease and relentless attacks, and the siege of Acre ended in humiliating failure. For the first time in his career, Napoleon tasted defeat, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. By late 1799, the situation in Egypt was untenable. News of political instability in France reached Napoleon, and he saw an opportunity. Leaving his army behind, he secretly set sail for France, evading the British Navy once again. His return was shrouded in mystery and intrigue. Would the French people welcome him as a hero, or had his star faded? As Napoleon arrived in Paris, the city was in turmoil. The Directory was weak, and France longed for strong leadership. Napoleon seized the moment, orchestrating a coup d'état that would make him first consul, the de facto ruler of France. The Egyptian campaign had been a mix of triumph and disaster, but it had solidified Napoleon's reputation as a man of destiny. He had faced immense challenges, both military and personal, and emerged stronger, more determined, and more ambitious than ever. What awaited him next was the ultimate test of his leadership, the transformation of France into an empire. But would his ambition lead to greatness or ruin? Stay tuned for Chapter 5, The Rise of the Emperor: Power, Glory, and the Path to Coronation, where we'll explore how Napoleon reshaped France and claimed the imperial crown. Chapter 5, The Rise of the Emperor: Power, Glory, and the Path to Coronation. The return to Paris. A hero's welcome, or a risky gamble. In October 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte returned to France under a veil of secrecy, having abandoned his army in Egypt to the mercy of uncertain fate. For a lesser man, this might have spelled disgrace, but Napoleon was not ordinary. As he stepped onto French soil, he was acutely aware of the fragility of the French Republic. The Directory, riddled with corruption and incompetence, was crumbling under its own weight. France, though victorious in some battles, teetered on the edge of chaos. Napoleon saw an opportunity, one that required courage, cunning, and impeccable timing. Paris was abuzz with rumors of his return. To the people, he was the hero of Italy, the visionary of Egypt, a man who could deliver them from the political turmoil that plagued the nation. But the political elite viewed him with suspicion. Could this ambitious general be trusted? Or was he yet another aspiring despot seeking to seize power? Napoleon wasted no time in dispelling doubt. With calculated precision, he positioned himself as France's savior, a leader who could restore stability and glory to the nation. The coup d'état of 18 Brumaire, November 9, 1799, was swift and decisive. Napoleon, along with his loyal allies, including his brother Lucien, manipulated the political landscape to dismantle the Directory and establish the consulate. At just 30 years old, Napoleon was named first consul, granting him near-dictatorial powers. But this was only the beginning. The suspense lingered. How far would Napoleon's ambition take him? Could he navigate the treacherous waters of French politics and cement his place as a ruler without equal? Rebuilding a nation, the mastermind at work as first consul, Napoleon embarked on an ambitious project to rebuild France. His vision extended beyond military conquest. He sought to create a legacy of order, prosperity, and reform. The Napoleonic Code, introduced in 1804, became the cornerstone of his domestic policy. This legal framework not only unified the chaotic French legal system, but also enshrined principles of equality before the law, religious freedom, and property rights. To this day, it remains one of his most enduring achievements. But not everyone welcomed Napoleon's reforms. The nobility, clinging to the remnants of their privilege, viewed him as a threat. The clergy, too, resisted his secular policies. Yet Napoleon's genius lay in his ability to balance competing interests. The Concordat of 1801, a treaty with the Catholic Church, restored religious harmony while maintaining state supremacy. His economic policies stabilized the French economy, introducing the Banque de France to regulate currency and rebuild trust in the financial system. France, under Napoleon's leadership, began to flourish. The streets of Paris bustled with renewed energy, and the nation's coffers swelled with revenue from efficient tax reforms. Yet beneath the surface, not all was well. Political dissent simmered, and foreign powers watched with unease as Napoleon's star continued to rise. The suspense built as Napoleon's actions hinted at a grander plan, one that would alter the very fabric of European history. From consul to emperor, the coronation of a legend by 1804, Napoleon's power was unassailable. Yet the title of first consul was insufficient for a man of his ambition. He yearned for something more, something eternal. The people adored him, the military revered him, and the political elite, though wary, dared not oppose him. Sensing the moment was ripe, Napoleon made his move. The French Senate, under his influence, declared him Emperor of the French in May 1804. But the coronation ceremony, held on December 2, 1804, was unlike anything the world had seen. In the grandeur of Notre Dame Cathedral, under the gaze of Pope Pius VII, Napoleon took destiny into his own hands. Rejecting tradition, he crowned himself, a symbolic act that sent a clear message. His power was not granted by divine authority or political consensus. It was seized by his own will. The coronation was a spectacle of opulence, designed to dazzle and intimidate. Napoleon's wife, Josephine, stood by his side, her elegance masking the fractures in their marriage. The event was immortalized in Jacques-Louis David's iconic painting, capturing the moment Napoleon raised the imperial crown above his head. But the grandeur of the ceremony could not conceal the underlying tension. Would Napoleon's reign usher in an era of peace and prosperity, or would it plunge Europe into endless war? The imperial court, a new era of power and intrigue. As emperor, Napoleon transformed the French court into a reflection of his vision. Gone were the ostentatious excesses of the Bourbon monarchy. In their place was a court that emphasized meritocracy, discipline, and grandeur. Titles of nobility were reintroduced, not as a return to the old regime, but as a reward for loyalty and achievement. Soldiers, scholars, and statesmen alike were elevated to positions of prominence, creating a new elite that owed its success to Napoleon, yet the court was not without its intrigues. Josephine, though crowned empress, faced growing pressure to produce an heir, a task complicated by her advancing age. Rumors of infidelity and betrayal swirled, threatening to destabilize Napoleon's personal life. Meanwhile, ambitious generals and politicians vied for his favor, each seeking to secure their place in his empire. The court became a stage for power plays, where alliances were forged and broken in the shadow of Napoleon's towering presence. By the end of 1804, Napoleon had achieved what few could have imagined. From a Corsican outsider to the ruler of France, his journey was a testament to ambition, intellect, and relentless determination. Yet, for all his accomplishments, the question lingered: could he hold on to power? As whispers of war grew louder, Napoleon's focus shifted to the battlefield, where his true genius lay. The stage was set for the next chapter of his life, a chapter that would see him challenge the might of Europe, redefine the art of warfare, and leave a legacy that would endure for centuries. But with every step forward, the stakes grew higher. What would become of Napoleon's dream of empire? Would he conquer the world, or would he fall victim to his own ambition? Napoleon's coronation marked the pinnacle of his ascent, but it also heralded the beginning of a new chapter fraught with peril and uncertainty. The world watched as he prepared to embark on his most ambitious campaigns yet. What lay ahead was a series of battles that would test his leadership, his strategy, and his resilience. Stay tuned for Chapter 6, The Grand Empire and the Thunder of War, where Napoleon's military brilliance and his unrelenting pursuit of dominance collide with the forces of resistance. Chapter 6, The Grand Empire and the Thunder of War. A new order in Europe. The vision of the Grand Empire. In the aftermath of Napoleon's coronation, the stage was set for a new kind of European order. The emperor's vision extended far beyond the borders of France. He sought to establish the Grand Empire, a realm that would unite the continent under his leadership, driven by principles of meritocracy, reform, and centralized control. But Europe was not a blank canvas waiting for Napoleon to paint his masterpiece. The continent was fragmented, with rival monarchies, ancient traditions, and power blocs determined to resist his ambitions. Napoleon wasted no time in consolidating his control. By 1806, he had dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, replacing it with the Confederation of the Rhine, a coalition of German states loyal to him. To the south, he installed loyal family members and trusted generals as rulers in Italy, Naples, and Spain. These puppet states were critical components of the Grand Empire, acting as buffers and strategic strongholds. Yet, this expansion came at a cost. Each new conquest stirred resentment among the conquered and alarmed neighboring powers. As the Grand Empire took shape, Napoleon introduced sweeping reforms to unify his territories. The Napoleonic Code was implemented across Europe, standardizing laws and dismantling feudal systems. Roads were built, education systems restructured, and religious tolerance enforced. Yet, beneath the veneer of progress, the seeds of rebellion were being sown. Nationalism, awakened by Napoleon's conquests, began to simmer in Spain, Prussia, and beyond. The suspense grew as Europe teetered on the brink. Would Napoleon's vision of a unified continent prevail, or would his empire crumble under the weight of its own ambitions? The Austerlitz masterpiece, Napoleon's genius on the battlefield. The Battle of Austerlitz, fought on December 2, 1805, was the crowning jewel of Napoleon's military career. Faced with a formidable coalition of Russian and Austrian forces, he employed tactics so audacious and cunning that they would be studied for generations. Outnumbered and outgunned, Napoleon feigned weakness, luring his enemies into a trap. His army, though smaller in number, was disciplined and fiercely loyal. As dawn broke over the battlefield, the sun cut through the morning mist, illuminating the terrain. Napoleon's plan was simple yet ingenious. He allowed the Allies to advance, seemingly leaving his right flank exposed. The Allied forces, sensing an opportunity, committed to an attack, only to find themselves ensnared. Napoleon's troops executed a masterful counterattack, cutting through the enemy lines with precision. By day's end, the coalition army was shattered, and Napoleon stood triumphant. The victory at Austerlitz was not just a military triumph, it was a psychological blow to Europe's monarchies. Napoleon's enemies, who had dismissed him as a mere upstart, now regarded him as a military genius, capable of defying the odds. Yet the victory also marked the beginning of Napoleon's overconfidence. His belief in his invincibility grew, setting the stage for greater risks and greater challenges. As the echoes of Austerlitz faded, a question lingered: could anyone stop Napoleon? Or was he destined to dominate Europe, the continental system, a double-edged sword in his quest to weaken Britain? Napoleon devised the continental system, a trade embargo designed to cripple the island nation's economy. By closing European ports to British goods, he hoped to force Britain into submission. On paper, the plan seemed brilliant. In practice, it unleashed chaos. The continental system disrupted economies across Europe, including France's own. Merchants, cut off from lucrative British trade, faced ruin. Smuggling became rampant, as traders defied the embargo to keep their businesses afloat. The system also strained Napoleon's relationships with his allies. Nations like Spain and Portugal, heavily reliant on British trade, resisted the blockade, drawing Napoleon into costly military interventions. The failure of the continental system exposed a critical flaw in Napoleon's strategy. His empire, though vast, was built on fragile foundations. Each new conquest brought new enemies, and the resources required to maintain his empire stretched even Napoleon's formidable capabilities to their limits. The suspense mounted as cracks began to appear in the Grand Empire. How long could Napoleon sustain his dominance? And at what cost? The Peninsular War. A quagmire of resistance in 1808, Napoleon made a fateful decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Seeking to enforce the continental system, he invaded Spain and installed his brother Joseph as king. The move sparked outrage among the Spanish people, who viewed Joseph as a puppet and Napoleon as an invader. What began as a swift military intervention soon devolved into a brutal guerrilla war. The Peninsular War was unlike any conflict Napoleon had faced before. Spanish guerrillas, supported by British forces under the command of Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, waged a relentless campaign of ambushes, sabotage, and attrition. Napoleon's armies, though superior in open battle, struggled to adapt to this unconventional warfare. The rugged terrain of the Iberian Peninsula became a graveyard for French soldiers. The war drained Napoleon's resources and morale. It also emboldened other nations to resist his rule. As news of French setbacks spread, uprisings erupted in Italy, Germany, and elsewhere. The Peninsular War, often referred to as the Spanish Ulcer, became a festering wound that weakened Napoleon's empire from within. The suspense deepened as Napoleon faced an enemy he could not defeat. Would this be the beginning of the end for the Grand Empire? The invasion of Russia. Hubris meets disaster. By 1812, Napoleon's empire spanned much of Europe, but his ambitions knew no bounds. His decision to invade Russia was driven by a combination of strategic necessity and personal hubris. Tsar Alexander I, defying the continental system, had reopened Russian ports to British trade. Napoleon saw this as a betrayal that could not go unpunished. The Grande Army, a force of over 600,000 soldiers from across Europe, marched into Russia in June 1812. The campaign began with high hopes, but it quickly turned into a nightmare. The Russian strategy of scorched earth left Napoleon's forces without supplies, and the vastness of the Russian landscape stretched his logistics to the breaking point. The turning point came at the Battle of Borodino, a brutal clash that left tens of thousands dead on both sides. Though Napoleon claimed victory, it was a hollow one. When he finally reached Moscow, he found the city abandoned and set ablaze by its own inhabitants. With no shelter, supplies, or clear path forward, Napoleon was forced to retreat. The retreat from Moscow was a harrowing ordeal. Winter descended with brutal force, and the Grande Army was decimated by cold, hunger, and relentless attacks from Russian forces. By the time Napoleon returned to France, his once mighty army had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. The invasion of Russia was a catastrophic failure, but it was also a turning point. Napoleon's aura of invincibility was shattered, and his enemies seized the opportunity to strike. The Grand Empire, once so formidable, began to crumble. As the fires of Moscow faded into the icy Russian winter, Napoleon's empire teetered on the brink. The man who had once been unstoppable now faced enemies on all sides. Yet, Napoleon was not one to surrender. What followed was a desperate struggle to hold on to power, culminating in a dramatic confrontation that would determine the fate of Europe. Stay tuned for Chapter 7, The Fall of the Emperor, Exile, Escape, and the Final Battle, where Napoleon's story takes its most dramatic turn. Will he reclaim his glory, or is his downfall inevitable? Chapter 7, The Fall of the Emperor, Exile, Escape, and the Final Battle. The coalition strikes back. The War of the Sixth Coalition. The disastrous Russian campaign in 1812 marked a turning point in Napoleon's reign. Sensing weakness, his enemies seized the moment. In 1813, a formidable alliance, comprising Britain, Prussia, Russia, Austria, and other European nations, formed the Sixth Coalition. Their goal was clear: to dismantle Napoleon's empire and restore the old order. The stage was set for a climactic struggle that would decide the fate of Europe. Napoleon, despite his losses, was far from defeated. With his characteristic determination, he raised another army, though it was composed largely of inexperienced conscripts. These young soldiers, often referred to as the Marie-Louises, lacked the skill and cohesion of the veterans lost in Russia. Yet, under Napoleon's leadership, they displayed remarkable courage. The campaign of 1813 unfolded across the vast landscapes of Central Europe. Napoleon achieved several victories, including the Battle of Dresden, where his strategic brilliance shone once again. However, his enemies learned from their past defeats. They coordinated their forces more effectively, adopting a strategy of attrition to stretch Napoleon's resources to the breaking point. The turning point came at the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations. Fought in October 1813, it was the largest battle in European history up to that point. Over 500,000 soldiers clashed in a brutal, four-day struggle. Napoleon's forces, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, suffered a devastating defeat. The battle marked the beginning of the end for the Grand Empire. As Napoleon retreated to France, the suspense reached a fever pitch. Could he rally his nation for one final stand, or was his empire doomed to collapse? The fall of Paris and the first abdication by early 1814, the coalition armies were closing in on Paris. Napoleon, ever the military genius, launched a desperate campaign to defend his homeland. Known as the 6 Days Campaign, his maneuvers were a masterclass in strategy. Outnumbered and outgunned, he inflicted significant losses on his enemies, rekindling hope among his supporters. But the odds were insurmountable. The coalition forces, numbering over 400,000, overwhelmed the French defenses. On March 31, 1814, Paris fell. The French people, weary of war and suffering, began to turn against their once revered emperor. Faced with mounting pressure from his generals and political allies, Napoleon was forced to abdicate on April 6, 1814. In a gesture of humiliation and irony, the coalition exiled Napoleon to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. Though stripped of his empire, he was granted the title of Emperor of Elba and allowed to retain a small guard. For most men, such a fall from power would have been the end. But Napoleon was not most men. Even in exile, he plotted his return. The suspense grew as whispers of his discontent reached Europe's monarchies. Could Napoleon rise again, or was he destined to remain a relic of the past? The 100 Days, Napoleon's triumphant return in February 1815, less than a year after his exile, Napoleon made a daring escape from Elba. With a small band of loyal followers, he landed on the French coast near Cannes. His journey to Paris was nothing short of legendary. As he marched north, soldiers sent to arrest him instead joined his cause, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" By the time he reached Paris, Napoleon had rallied thousands to his banner. King Louis XVIII, who had been restored to the throne, fled, and Napoleon reclaimed his position as Emperor of France. The period of his return, known as the 100 Days, electrified Europe. Napoleon promised a new era of peace and reform, but the coalition was unwilling to take any chances. They mobilized their armies to confront him once and for all. Could Napoleon outwit his enemies one last time? Or was this truly the end of his reign? Waterloo, the final battle, the Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, was the climax of Napoleon's epic saga. Facing the combined forces of the Duke of Wellington's British Army and Prussian forces under Gebhard Lebrecht von Blücher, Napoleon's fate hung in the balance. The battlefield was drenched in rain, turning the ground into a muddy quagmire that delayed Napoleon's attack. Despite these setbacks, he fought with the tenacity that had defined his career. His troops, including the feared Imperial Guard, launched wave after wave of assaults. For hours, the outcome was uncertain, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But as evening fell, the tide turned against Napoleon. The arrival of Blücher's Prussian forces overwhelmed the French army. The once invincible Imperial Guard was broken, and panic spread among Napoleon's troops. By nightfall, the French army was in full retreat, and Napoleon's dreams of restoring his empire were shattered. Waterloo was not just a military defeat, it was the end of an era. Napoleon, the master tactician, had met his match. Europe breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the man who had reshaped the continent would not fade quietly into history. Exiled to St. Helena. After his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon attempted to flee to America, but British forces intercepted him. This time, there would be no leniency. In October 1815, he was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Far from the politics and battles of Europe, Napoleon lived out his final years in isolation. St. Helena was a far cry from the grandeur of the Tuileries Palace. Napoleon's health deteriorated, and he spent his days dictating memoirs, reflecting on his life, and railing against his captors. Despite his fall from power, his legend grew. Across Europe and beyond, people debated his legacy, portraying him as either a tyrant or a hero. Napoleon died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51. The cause of his death remains a topic of debate, with theories ranging from stomach cancer to arsenic poisoning. His final words, France, the army, the head of the army, Josephine, encapsulated his lifelong passions. Though Napoleon's life ended on the windswept island of St. Helena, his story was far from over. His influence would ripple through history, inspiring revolutions, reshaping nations, and leaving an indelible mark on the world. The question lingers, was Napoleon a conqueror or a visionary, a tyrant or a genius? His legacy continues to ignite debate, keeping his memory alive even centuries after his death. Stay tuned for the epilogue, the legacy of Napoleon, legend, myth, and the man behind the crown. Epilogue. The legacy of Napoleon, legend, myth, and the man behind the crown. The enduring legend of Napoleon. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte did not end with his death in 1821. In fact, his legend only grew in the years and decades that followed. Across Europe, he became a symbol of ambition, genius, and defiance against the odds. His name evoked admiration and fear in equal measure. Some saw him as the ultimate hero, a man who rose from humble beginnings to reshape the world. Others regarded him as a ruthless tyrant, whose lust for power caused untold suffering. One of the most enduring aspects of Napoleon's legacy is the mythos surrounding his life. Artists, writers, and historians have immortalized him in countless works, from Victor Hugo's stirring prose to Jacques-Louis David's majestic paintings. Napoleon's famous pose, hand tucked into his waistcoat, gazing forward with steely determination, became a visual shorthand for leadership and power. But what is it about Napoleon that continues to captivate us? Perhaps it is the paradox of his character. A man capable of both great compassion and great cruelty, a visionary who inspired loyalty but demanded absolute obedience. His life is a study in contradictions, making him a figure who defies simple categorization. Napoleon's reforms, architect of modern Europe beyond the battles and political intrigue, Napoleon's reign left a profound mark on Europe and the world. His legal and administrative reforms, encapsulated in the Napoleonic Code, revolutionized governance. The code established principles of equality before the law, property rights, and the separation of church and state. It became a model for legal systems around the globe, influencing countries as diverse as Italy, Germany, and even Latin America. Napoleon also reorganized education, creating a centralized system that emphasized meritocracy. His establishment of lycées and other institutions laid the groundwork for modern public education in France. Similarly, his emphasis on infrastructure, building roads, bridges, and canals, spurred economic growth and improved connectivity across his empire. However, these achievements came at a cost. Napoleon's aggressive policies often prioritized military expansion over the well-being of his subjects. His wars devastated economies, disrupted lives, and caused immense human suffering. The question remains, do his accomplishments outweigh the toll of his ambitions? Napoleon as a symbol of power and resilience throughout history. Napoleon has been invoked as a symbol of resilience and the indomitable human spirit. Leaders and revolutionaries have drawn inspiration from his rise to power. Figures as diverse as Simon Bolivar, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, and even Adolf Hitler studied his strategies and emulated his tactics. Yet, his legacy is not without controversy. Napoleon's critics point to his authoritarian rule, his suppression of dissent, and his willingness to sacrifice lives for the sake of his ambitions. His decision to reinstate slavery in French colonies, after it had been abolished during the French Revolution, remains a dark stain on his record. For many, Napoleon's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris. His meteoric rise was matched only by his dramatic fall, serving as a reminder that even the most powerful can be undone by their flaws. Napoleon's influence on popular culture. In the realm of popular culture, Napoleon has achieved a level of fame rivaled by few historical figures. His life has been the subject of novels, films, operas, and even video games. From Stanley Kubrick's unrealized film project to Ridley Scott's highly anticipated biopic, Napoleon continues to fascinate storytellers. The Napoleon complex, a term used to describe individuals with an outsized drive for dominance, is a direct nod to the emperor's legacy. While often inaccurately associated with his height, he was actually of average height for his time. The phrase captures the perception of Napoleon as a man determined to compensate for any perceived shortcomings. His iconic imagery, from the bicorn hat to the white and blue military uniform, remains instantly recognizable. It is a testament to his enduring presence in the collective imagination. The debate over Napoleon's legacy more than 2 centuries after his death, the debate over Napoleon's legacy rages on. Historians continue to analyze his policies, dissect his strategies, and reassess his impact on the world. Was he a liberator or a despot? A reformer or a warmonger? The answer, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. Napoleon's own words offer a glimpse into his self-perception. In exile, he once declared, "I wanted to found a European system, a European code of laws, a European judiciary. There would have been but one people in Europe." His vision of a unified Europe, though realized in a different form through institutions like the European Union, remains a subject of fascination. For the people of France, Napoleon's legacy is particularly complex. He is celebrated as a national hero, yet his rule brought immense suffering to the country. His tomb at Les Invalides in Paris stands as a symbol of his enduring influence, attracting millions of visitors each year. Final thoughts. The man behind the legend. As the curtain falls on the saga of Napoleon Bonaparte, one thing is clear: his life was anything but ordinary. From his birth on the rugged island of Corsica to his death on the isolated cliffs of St. Helena, Napoleon's journey was a testament to the heights of human ambition. He was a man who dared to dream, to conquer, and to create. But Napoleon was also a man who struggled with his own limitations. His relentless pursuit of power, his inability to compromise, and his insatiable ambition ultimately led to his downfall. In the end, his story is not just about empires and battles. It is a deeply human tale of triumph and tragedy. Napoleon once said, "Great ambition is the passion of a great character. Those endowed with it may perform very good or very bad acts. All depends on the principles which direct them." His life serves as both an inspiration and a warning, a reminder of the potential and peril of ambition. And so, as we close the book on Napoleon Bonaparte, the question lingers: what would you have done in his place? Would you have reached for the stars, knowing the risk of falling, or would you have played it safe? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because the story of Napoleon is not just history. It is a reflection of the choices we all face.